Hi to the panelists, and thanks for coming. It was a really excellent panel. And the Japanese response was also very telling. I actually have a question about patterns that I've noticed in all these papers. And I really do agree that there's conflict going on between whether we can draw these connections, these identities back to Africa, whether there's this inherent Creoleness sort of to the life here. But what I'm really interested in is why we tend to talk so much about people constructing their lives. And we're not talking, and I do know that there's an importance to the discussion of identity, but the specificity, especially of caching, for example, the event specificity of that, and the materiality as well, where these objects do have things that we can talk about when we speak about them as particular creations that were put there at a particular time. And I know that they connect to other objects and other caches in that way, but I feel like it leads to this hyper-romanticization when we have all these people doing all this creating of themselves all the time and not really dealing with the materialities of the objects that they're creating, where that particular object came from, and also with the practices that were related to it. I work in Haiti, and I actually just got back from seeing like 4 caches last week. And I'm very fascinated in, particularly in your work with caching. But I'm just curious about that. How is it possible that, especially when we're dealing with history, that we can talk about the events that these were doing, that the actual people that were involved, as opposed to just reifying this to the level always of cultural discussion?
If I can try to discern part of the question, I can respond to, I guess. In each of these archaeology sites, I'd say that we rarely lack the specificity of evidence that we can speak to particular individuals as the creators. We begin to get some degree of evidence, particularly a place like the Levi Jordan plantation site, that they have a sustained occupation where they'll get a fair amount of evidence that they can begin to paint a bit of a picture of an individual. But one of the challenges of archaeology is that we often don't have access down to the level of the individual. So part of the difference in conversation is an archaeologist would respond to Professor McGaffey of saying, you're speaking of an atomistic humanism, where you talk about individuals and individual creativity. For anthropologists and archaeologists, we focus more on culture because we don't excavate an individual, we can't get to that level of specificity. So what we're thinking of are clusters of belief systems that are flowing through populations and the way that they're being played out in new ways.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come across it as having this atmosphere humanism. I just meant to say that the event itself, like the actual event that happened. When I've seen caches, I've never seen them done to represent a cosmogram. I've seen caches done to heal people. I've seen caches done to affect a particular medical reason, or I've seen people do caches at a particularly agonizing time in their life. And I know we can't access that entirely in the archaeological record, but I do wonder if we move towards the practice itself, the act of putting it in the earth, that's something that we can get at, materiality, placing it into the earth.
Yeah, if you are, the sites that I'm describing, I don't know that I can be the best advocate for. I'm not the principal investigator of those sites. I'm giving you a bit of an overview of what has been found and proposed. But you might, if you were persuaded, perhaps for like the case of the Carroll House in Annapolis, it's one cache placed just in one corner of the building. The other thing that may be happening between the archaeological finds generally and the experience you're seeing out there, on the ground in real life in Haiti, is you're seeing individual instances, and these spaces were occupied over generations. So the Carroll House was occupied for a number of generations of African American families living in that space within the Carroll House, similar for the Brazoria instance. So you may see an accumulation of the spatial remains of different cache instances archaeologically, that you're seeing a slice in time, in real time, in Haiti. You're seeing individual instances of this. So we may actually see some degree of a sort of a layering of instances, a layering of activity in the archaeological record that you won't see when you're seeing this live and occurring. The other ones would be if you're persuaded by the ones where you think there's the simplest form of Dikenga, being the solemnization of a space by putting caches at quadrilateral configuration. And this is, again, archaeologists are doing this when they have knowledge of a strong presence of Congolese captives in the area. If you're persuaded by that, you can again think of this as developing over time, and that perhaps actually, the key operation would have been in the middle of the space, which would have been the healing ceremony. So that what we're seeing, it may even be somewhat the secondary characteristics of the performance, which is somewhat designating the space, but then the real action would have been within the middle of the space of taking, some version of both taking expression of healing or other forms that are developing in new ways in the new world. But you definitely, there's a bit of a passing of conversations between archaeologists and historians quite often, in that archaeologists are always under these evidential constraints that we rarely can tell you anything about an individual. I mean, that's an archaeologist's nirvana if you can get to that level of specificity. So we typically are coming in the United States with anthropological theory of flows of ideas, of dispositions within certain populations over time, and how that's being inflected in new ways. So you get a different level of conversation now.
Just real fast. Everybody that I worked with was eminently practical. Every single thing that may look very abstract here fit into some stream of practical action in somebody's life. It's real hard to try to give people an overview at the same time. So today it's, let's believe there's some kind of pattern that over time and space, that's already been done for Haiti in certain ways, and then it's problematized in lots of ways. But here, because of factors that Jason addressed very well, it's always swimming upstream against all sorts of ideological problems. So I think that's, it's just well to remember that when you talk about people with specific illnesses and problems, actually, that's not written out of archaeology. It could be why you threw the bowl or whatever, but.
I'm not quite sure I understand the problem or the question. It seems to me that you are asking, why is it that we go on and on about construction of identity and we don't deal sufficiently with material realities of life? The material realities of life are how you construct your identity, and you're doing it every day. When you get up and you decide what clothes to put on, you go to the barber and you decide what your haircut will be, you mention your ancestors, and so on and so forth. These are mundane, practical things. We can't, in the case of some extinct slave plantation in Virginia, we can't detail all this. It's hard enough doing it when you're actually faced with real human beings doing this kind of thing, because it's in many ways, a very private activity, not something that's there to be photographed. Right?
I also like to react to that. The thing with historical linguistics is kind of the same problem like archaeology, is that you do research on things rather than individuals. So that's just part of the method. But also when you do research on food, well, there's something very practical about food, and I think I showed that also in the first slide, is that it's simply you cook or you prepare what's available, and you have to eat because well, otherwise you don't survive. Of course, there is this identity thing about food as well. And when I was in the Kongo region, I was in the south of Congo, a lot of people did not identify with Mwamba Kuba, but rather with Kikamba, for instance, people who Bakamba, who speak Kikamba, they identified with Black-Eyed Peas, for instance. I think, well, as a part of the methodology, I'm forced to talk about objects and things and real things, and I also think, considering that there is not much known about food history of Central Africa, I think it's a good thing to start with just practical things, and then maybe we can move on to the social aspects later.
More questions?
I'd like to ask one question. Well, actually, it's kind of a question and kind of a statement. I have to say this. I find myself in an awkward situation, which is that if I want to ask a question, it would be very technical, and some of us will get what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I make a statement. So let me just, if I can, say something about Ikenge and cosmograms. My opinion is that the single most common cosmogram that one finds in associations which look to be strongly associated with Kongo is the X or cross shape. And that particular item is a Christian cross, which would make sense given the Christian cross background of the Congos. And because that symbol has meaning as a religious object, it makes it very important. Now, the term Ikenge, as Wyatt pointed out, occurs for the first time in Kikongo that I know of in Foucault's writing. It's not in Lamant's dictionary, it's not in Bentley's dictionary, it's not in any dictionary I consulted. I went through the Lamont cahiers that Wyatt has published, such as if we're looking for this book, this particular term, or any root or reflex of it, which might conceivably describe cross. Moreover, I decided, let's take a look at Foucault himself, and let's read the Kikongo section instead of the French. So, lo and behold, the term that he reglosses along with Ikenge is Goluzu, a word that derives clearly from the Portuguese word cruz, which was borrowed in the Kikongo. We can find it in the 17th century catechism. We can find it in the dictionary. I think this is really convincing evidence from my point of view that people thought that cross-shaped object, item, whether it was in the X form or in the more traditional form, whether it had equilateral branches or otherwise, is well attested in cave art in the Congo region. It's well attested on church steeples. It's well attested in large 7, 8, 9 meter rural crosses which decorated the entire countryside of the Kingdom of Congo. It was very much a part of popular belief, and it's incorporated as a Cecilia's form, as shown us in many different ways within various types of Congo decoration. So I think that when our Christian Congos crossed the ocean, and I might add that that group that made our face jugs came from, I think, an area right around Madimba, an area that was the core of the Christian area of the Kingdom of Congo. There's no question about their roots. They brought that idea with them. And they brought that symbol with them. And this is not to dispute, by the way, that I think that these assemblages of objects are indeed drawing on the ideas that one uses to create the object that's called Nkisi. Nowadays, although in Congo that was called Keke in the 17th and 18th centuries, those objects, I think, those assemblages do have significance of a healing religious nature. I think that's probably plausible, the way it is, because what is called Nkisi has many, many different forms, and you gather things together metaphorically. You do have to have somebody to charge them, though. You have to have some sort of possession. It has to be a spiritual entity. You can't just do this on your own, is my understanding of the way it works. So I guess that's a statement rather than a question. Sorry.
I want to reply to John's non-question. We have to distinguish between a cross as a symbol and a cross as an organizer for a ritual. Clearly, from a very early time, the cross as a unitary symbol stood for Christianity, the missionaries, the church, and all that kind of thing. No problem. But a cross shape, which you discover in, for example, Kimpasi, is not a unitary symbol. It's an organizer of ritual action. It says there is a boundary between this world and the next world, and we're now about to cross that boundary. So and the boundary could be anything. It could be a mark that you make, or it could be a geographical feature that you make use of. It's the edge of the village where you bury twins, or it is the margin between the village and the forest in which there is a cemetery of the dead, or it's a little local stream. Let's imagine that there is a woman who has trouble with childbearing, and so she goes to see a healer, and they cross a little stream, and the healer in effect says, we are now in the land of the dead where we can contact the revivifying powers of the Bisimbi. So we conduct the ritual there, and then when it's all over, the healer leads the client back over the stream, and they hook their little fingers together like this, and they sing the song, Songi and Songi Zila, right? The guide who shows the way. So we have been to the land of the dead, and we come back again, and the line is not a line on a diagram. It's a way of thinking about and making happen the ritual which will transform this woman's life.
Anyone else?
I think this should be the last question because we're way over.
Bit of a comment. If any of you have seen the cross in ritual action, you have a sense of how it is used. Zambian Zulu, Zambian Toto. Or if I am telling the truth, if not telling you, you might be struck dead. I'm still here. I would like to make a brief homage to Fukiao. I heard him offer a prayer at a funeral in 1969, and he said, may we be witnesses to those who follow us, and may they remember us like we remember those who go ahead of us, and may they say good things of us. And Fukiao certainly gave us much inspiration, many people. I do know that he stopped using references in his work. He and I had many conversations in 64 to 66 and 69, and again here in the US, and everyone should know that he was supplied with much material to read and references and so forth, but in his own writing he stopped using references, which suggests that, as you say, he was not really compiling historical texts and summaries. He was creating his own system and his own thoughts, and that's worth a lot, and he is in the hearts of many of us. May he rest in peace.